Okay, we know how this works, so thank you to... I'm going to pin this on you, Jonathan, in the main for selecting these talking points, so thank you. Fuel crisis, first of all. I suppose this is, it's not just fuel, it's everything, rising costs, etc. It's a concern for the economy, it's a concern for all parts of the country, it's a concern for racing.
Absolutely, and as we know, racing is a very delicate ecosystem, so when the pinch is put on one of its many factions, that will have a knock-on effect for other people. So you've got trainers now who are facing rising costs to send horses, perhaps even have to make slightly harder decisions about where they send horses, how many horses they send, things like that. There's going to be a knock-on effect, isn't there? They're going to logically have to rise their costs, and who is it that's going to bear the brunt of that? Well, owners are going to have to suffer a little bit of pain, I'd imagine. I'd just hope that the pain is shared in an even way so that the owners aren't having their costs hiked up too much and fronting the bill again, because it's already not particularly cheap to own a racehorse, particularly with relatively paltry returns in prize money. So, yeah, that would be my concern, that the owners are the ones that are going to have to foot the majority of this bill, and it is a concern, and those are conversations trainers are going to have, because they won't want to raise their fees, they won't want to, put an extra strain on the people that are supporting them, but that could be the direction of travel. Haven't
we been saying this for a while, and so far we've held up pretty well as a sport, or are we only going to see the knock-on effect, do you think, of the last few years now?
Well, I think the prize money thing is the key, because horses aren't paying their way here, even horses that win 2 or 3 times. So, I mean, that's really, if you get the prize money sorted out, it doesn't matter if the fuel costs a bit more, or the feed, because you're going to pay your way if you win a race or 2. So, that is ultimately. I mean, I do slightly worry that a lot of people are going to start looking to go abroad now, and that British racing's reputation... Can I finish?
Yeah, please do.
Its reputation isn't going to be enough to sustain it at some point. We're going to reach, a place where that's going to happen.
I think we are definitely seeing that at the moment, have the last few years, particularly with the rise of racing in the Middle East, etc. We are definitely seeing that at the moment. We move on. Hoskins, this is not Bob, Sam Hoskins, has stepped down as his position to his position at the ROA, and he cut a pretty frustrated figure. I think he has largely over the last year or so. What did you make of it?
Well, the ROA has a slightly tricky job, because it's there to promote and support its members and do sort of things that help them out at a personal, individual level, stuff at racecourses, entry, this, that and the other. But it also has a very important seat at the table when it's sitting alongside the NTF, the BHA, and I suppose the frustration is, or the sort of challenge that's being presented is, are they doing enough to represent the needs of owners, given everything we've just spoken about? And I think Hoskins has had a little bit of frustration in that he didn't feel as though perhaps enough was being done. And the most worrying thing from what he came out and said afterwards was he didn't feel that his desire to push syndicate and shared ownership was, he felt that was perhaps falling slightly on deaf ears, which is a big concern. Obviously the ROA do have initiatives, we have to get that out there. They do have plans for shared ownership, for syndication. But this idea that perhaps they're not as receptive to it as they ought to be is worrying, because that's one of the high growth areas that we're looking at.
Yeah, and it's something that Sam has obviously been a huge advocate of with Kennet Valley and Hot to Trot as well. He was also quite outspoken earlier on in the year about not just syndicates, but those wishing to set up syndicates who aren't as well regulated perhaps as they should be, given that some syndicate members have been stung in the past. Is enough being done to protect syndicate members?
Well, there's a new association for syndicate managers, I think. I'm not quite sure what it's called. I mean, Sam he has about 400 clients, so he's representing a lot of people, and I think he doesn't strike me as someone who gets in a strop and does something like that without thinking about it. and I can see, he clearly feels that not enough is being done by the ROA for syndicates.
Talking of syndicates, Put the Kettle On's owners, the group of owners, are putting her through the ring at Aintree. I'm sure she'll fetch a pretty price as well. She's surely going to be very popular. They received some criticism from some parts. Not sure how high up the criticism came from, but there was some negativity towards their decision to do that. Well, why? Where's this? Can you see this as a negative in any way?
I don't quite understand the criticism myself. They've obviously had a very talented mare who's won some nice races for them, taken them to meetings that traditionally syndicates perhaps haven't had that same influence at, taking on the JP McManuses and Gigginstown's of this world. So it's a great story. She's obviously not been able to replicate that this season, so they've had to make a decision. And I think it's quite right that they sell her and for a broodmare and use that fund to reinvest back into the syndicate and have it just feels like a fitting ending to the story, really, that why wouldn't they make money off of her at the end of it all? They haven't got the facilities they'd love to have kept her and bred from her and this, that, and, but not everyone can do that. So I can't really see where the criticism came from myself.
Well, she's worth over 300 grand. I can hear the auctioneer now starting off by saying this is a collector's item, old cliche. And she's the perfect age to go off to stud. She's got a lot of speed. Only mare, I think, to have won the champion chase, was she? The only mare. And blimey, why wouldn't you? They could go and buy, if she makes over 300 grand, they could go and buy 3 or 4 really smart point winners and hope to reinvest or whatever. Breeding's breeding's a very specialised thing, and I think you're either into it or you're not. No one criticised Gigginstown for selling Apple's Jade. No one criticised Rich Ritchie for selling Annie Power, which she did privately, or Benny de Deux. And Magic of Light, second in the National, was sold to go to stud, I think. No one criticised the exes of the Potts family. So, I mean, why are they criticising it? I do not know. Perfect time to collect.
Yeah, and if anything, doing right by the mare, a proper operation.
Do it the
right way.
Absolutely.
Trainers Championship, the UK Trainers Championship. So we know what Willie's likely to send to Aintree now, and I think there was a lot of focus on whether or not, or the ammunition he was going to send there, whether he was going to have a real crack at the UK Trainers title. He's got a couple going there on the Thursday. Is it captured your imagination, the Trainers title?
Well, I think he's struggling. He's going to struggle to be involved. He doesn't look like he's that interested to me. Otherwise, I think he'd have been running things this weekend in Scotland, and I think he's probably much more worried about Punchestown. If he won the National, that's puts him in the mix. But I still think he's got to win more than just the National. He's going to have 4 or 5 runners. Nicky Henderson, Dan Skelton, and Paul Nicholls are all going to have 1 runner each, I think. It would make a big difference to them because they're a bit further clear of Willie. But I think even if he won the National, he'd be struggling to be in the mix, really.
Similarly, I think it probably sent a chill down their spines when he said, I'm looking at the British Championship after it was Britain and Ireland versus Willie Mullins at the festival. But like you say, he's not sending too many horses over to Aintree. He would have, if he was really sick, he would have gone to Ayr because there was a lot of races there you'd think would be sort of tailor-made. I think Punchestown is top of his to-do list. Of the others, it's going to be a really interesting end to the season because Nicholls was quite publicly didn't have too many runners at Cheltenham, looking at Aintree with a lot of his top horses. Henderson's entries for the second day in particular, he's got all sorts of very good horses going. Skelton's not without a chance, so it would be great if it went down to the final day at Sandown, wouldn't it?
I love the idea of the Prestbury Cup at Cheltenham being a 3-horse race next year. So forget UK and Ireland, a bit like making the 5 nations the 6 nations. Yeah. Right, racecourse admission. So this is with regard to, well, people going racing, whether or not it's a good value day out, what you can expect when going racing. What's your take on where we are currently, particularly post-COVID, with crowds going back onto the racecourse?
Well, it's a difficult situation because, like everybody, the racecourse groups and independent racecourses have had to sort of sit and suffer without paying customers. You can't underestimate, and we can put figures on it, you can't underestimate just how big a financial hit that was. So you can understand if there is a degree of recouping of losses going on, you can understand. But at the same time, there's a sweet spot here, isn't there, where you're perhaps charging that little bit more and capitalising on racegoers who are desperate to come back without taking the mickey and charging for something that does not remotely tally with the experience. You know, we've seen one scroll through Twitter and you'll see various sort of, I've paid some silly amount to get to a midweek meeting and there's only so many runners. That's the situation you have to avoid. It has to at least tally with the experience.
Is it a good value day out going racing?
I'm always in the press room.
I don't know.
I mean, yeah, I think it is probably it lasts longer than a football match, and you can have a drink, and I mean, you can have too much drink as well, which obviously can become a problem. Racecourses are in that sort of a bit like bookmakers who want you to bet, but say they don't want you to bet too much because you don't, this is coming up in the gambling review, obviously. They don't want people losing too much money, but, racecourses want you to go and they want you to have a drink, to help the cash flow.
That's good timing for the bell. Bob Baffert, we move on to. So this was on Friday. The Kentucky Horse Racing Commission said that they refused to grant him a stay of 90 days for his appeal against not being able to run horses there for 2 years at Churchill Downs. The ban is set to start now tomorrow. We're finally getting there, having, I think, the ruling been made on June the 2nd last year. We are approaching the end to the road to the Kentucky Derby and finding out what horses are going to run. I think 4 main horses he's sent to different trainers. I suppose the one thing for me, Jonathan, is June the 2nd to now, why are we still taking so long? And according to Baffert's camp, it's still not a done deal. Why haven't we got closure on this?
Well, I think given the nature of the case, it's incredibly high profile. We're talking about one of the leading trainers in the US who obviously had a big winner in Dubai as well. He's a high profile figure, potentially missing out on the high profile race. It has to be handled fairly carefully, and there's clearly a great deal of evidence to pore over. I think he's obviously made the decision to send some of those top horses. So from a sort of equine talent perspective, we're still going to have them in the Kentucky Derby, but it might be a Kentucky Derby without Bob Baffert, which from a PR perspective for the sport is absolutely dreadful.
So it's do you think it's a good thing that there'll be no Bob Baffert on the race card at the Kentucky Derby this year, given what's transpired, or a bad thing?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? Because he obviously rejects all the allegations, is fighting it, appealing it. So it's difficult to say whether it's a good or bad thing until we have the gift of hindsight and we can say he was in the wrong or he wasn't in the wrong. It's one of those where there'll be his name won't be on the race card, but we know where the horses have come from. So it's a little bit of a sort of novelty thing, really. And
it sticks. I think what I found frustrating about the Country Grammar winner in the Dubai World Cup was, there were still comments made. I feel like too much reference is made to the comments I read on social media, but hey, that's quite often how I get my news now. And as expected, Bob Baffert wins the Dubai World Cup, and this is you could see it as a tremendous training performance, which in essence it was, but these things stick. So there we are. We move on. Gambling review. So we're not too far away from the white paper. I think the frightening white paper for as far as the sport is concerned. Who wants to lead off? Jonathan wants to lead off. I saw him put his hand up. Okay, so how worried should horse racing be?
Well, firstly, we've been told, it was said in the Commons this week, that it's very imminent, which is difficult to read from a government perspective. That could be 2 weeks or 2 years. No one really knows. But it is about to happen. It's about to be released. How worrying is it? Well, I think Neil Channing put it nicely when he said it is an existential crisis for the sport at its worst, in its worst iteration. I think everybody in racing that has an interest, and bookmakers especially have an interest in a well-regulated, modern gambling act that fits the sort of situation that customers are facing, that's fit for the online world, that covers casino, sportsbook and everything else. I think my chief concern is we don't want to see an act that comes in that doesn't create that very key demarcation between casino-style games, FOBTs, betting, online slot machines, and sportsbook, which is generally a less harmful, generally speaking, a less harmful, though it can still be, a less harmful sort of pastime. So for racing's point of view, that needs to be differentiated, because the knock-on, should it be lumped in with casino games, should there be affordability checks and strict limits, would be huge, because it's less money bet on racing, it's less money for the levy, and we're back to prize money in the top talking point. You know, it could have huge ramifications in its worst form.
Just very briefly, I was listening to the Nick Luck Daily podcast. He also has a podcast, and he was they were talking about Jim McGrath was talking about Hong Kong and how well punters are looked after in Hong Kong, and how that rewards the prize money in the sport, because punters are so willing to bet over there and you know, enjoy that pastime, and that then feeds into the sport. We just feel in a very different place to that at the moment, don't we?
I think we do, yeah. I mean, well, no one really knows what's going to come out in this, and you know, things have been said in Parliament, and which would be quite frightening for racing. It's quite a big business, racing, from the government's point of view, and I can't see that they're going to, take it down with something that's going to. I mean, maybe I'm just an optimist, but hopefully there are enough people in there who understand that, you know, what a huge industry it is for the country.
We will leave it there. That is Talking Points done.